Welcome to Karma Chronicles. Please like the video and subscribe. Let's begin.
I saw the post on Facebook late one evening. Kate was getting married. The photos looked beautiful, but what caught my eye first was the guest list in the comments, a sea of familiar names, everyone except me. I stared at the screen for a long time, numb. I wasn't surprised. It's always been this way. They erased me quietly, little by little, until there was no trace left. My own brother Michael confirmed it when I asked him. "Yeah, you're not invited," he said, his voice flat, like it was no big deal. "Dad doesn't want you there." I wasn't angry, not really. More like I'd already gotten used to it. It was the same old thing, get left out again. But this time, something stirred in me, an odd, stubborn pull. I'd been erased from too many things, too many times. This one? I wasn't going to be left out. I went online and booked a plane ticket for the wedding, not bothering to tell anyone. A simple dress, a small pin from my last promotion. Nothing too flashy, just enough to remind me who I was. I packed light, but I didn't need much. Just enough to show up. I wasn't going to beg for an invitation. I was going to make sure they knew I was still part of the damn family, even if they didn't want me there. I walked into the church, and for a moment, it felt like I'd stepped into another world. Gold accents on the pews, soft lighting that made everything look more elegant than I remembered. The walls were high, the ceilings too, the kind of place you'd expect rich people to get married. Everything felt polished, pristine, but I didn't belong here anymore. I slipped quietly into the back row, out of the way, as always. I wasn't trying to make a scene, just trying to take it all in. Kate looked beautiful in her dress, radiant even, and her fiancé, the guy she'd picked after all these years, stood beside her, holding her hand like he couldn't wait for the world to see. It was all perfect, in the way only weddings can be, but there was a bitter edge to it, a sharp one that I couldn't shake. From the front, my father's loud voice cut through the room. "She's a distraction," he said, not caring who overheard. I didn't have to look to know who he was talking about. He was talking about me. I glanced over. He stood by the entrance, shaking hands with guests like some military commander, running the show from behind the scenes. His eyes were cold as usual, calculating, like he was checking each person off his list. He didn't even look my way. I don't think he would have noticed if I disappeared right now. "And with her military service," he continued, louder than necessary. "Don't get me wrong, she's got her place, but not here. Not today." The words stung, but I didn't flinch. Instead, something clicked in me. I wasn't invisible. I was intentionally forgotten. There was a difference. He had made sure of that. But I wasn't going anywhere. I sat back in the pew, folding my hands on my lap. I watched Kate and her fiancé. He looked at her like she was the only person in the room, and she returned his gaze with a softness I hadn't seen in a long time. They didn't know it, but they had everything I had lost. Family, acceptance, love. The ceremony started, but I stayed seated, not because I didn't care, but because I didn't belong up there with them. The air was thick with tension, and I could feel it settling in my chest. I'd been part of this world once, and now it was like I was watching it through a window. It wasn't my life anymore, but that didn't mean I couldn't be here. I let the words of the priest wash over me as the crowd shifted in their seats. My father, of course, was in full control, making sure no one stepped out of line. He was the man of the hour. The rest of us, we were just extras in his story. Kate's vows were beautiful, her voice trembling with the kind of emotion you don't see often in this family. I could hear the sincerity in her words. It was a sharp contrast to the cold, calculated way we were raised. But that's how it went. Kate would get everything, and I would stay here, in the back, holding my peace. And that's exactly how it stayed. Me, invisible, but watching it all. As the ceremony carried on, I scanned the crowd. Faces I hadn't seen in years, all turned toward the altar. It wasn't until the groom's profile came into view that something shifted inside me. Josh. I hadn't thought about him in a while. He'd been one of my teammates back in the field, when things went wrong, when we had to rely on each other more than we ever thought possible. He wasn't like the others, never cared about the politics or the rules the way some of the higher-ups did. He cared about getting the job done and getting everyone out alive. And now, here he was, standing in front of a crowd, in a tux. I didn't know what I expected, but it wasn't this. His eyes scanned the room, landing on me for just a second. A flash of recognition crossed his face, then he looked away, quick enough to make it seem like a mistake. But I saw it. He saw me. I looked back at him, not giving away anything. We both knew the history. And we both knew what had come after that mission, how we'd both been cast aside, one way or another. The vows were exchanged, but I wasn't really paying attention to them. Instead, I was stuck on that moment, on the memory of Josh and me in the field, in the middle of chaos, and how he had been the only one who truly understood me. In a way, I'd saved him, but it felt like we had both saved each other. The past hit me all at once, uninvited, and I wondered if he even remembered that night like I did. The ceremony finished, and the MC stepped up to the mic. He went through the usual thank yous to the parents, the bridal party. My name wasn't mentioned, of course. I hadn't expected it to be. But I did catch my father's eyes as they flicked to the program, his face hard and unreadable. And then something unexpected happened. Josh stepped up to the mic, his voice calm but clear. "If I could have everyone's attention for a moment," he said, "I'd like to take a second to thank a few people who are here today, people who have meant a lot to me." He paused for a beat, his eyes scanning the crowd. I sat still, not sure what was coming next. "There's one person who I owe everything to," Josh continued, his voice gaining weight. "She's not just a hero to me, but to my whole team. I wouldn't be here today if it weren't for her. She taught me more about leadership than anyone else. And I owe her my life." The words hung in the air for a second, thick with meaning. Everyone in the room was silent, unsure of what had just been said. I felt every single set of eyes turned toward me, some with confusion, some with surprise. But it wasn't that bothered me. It was my father's reaction. I saw him twitch, his hand tightening around the drink in front of him. For a moment, he looked like he was going to stand up, maybe stop this. But he stayed in his seat, his eyes narrowing. Michael, sitting next to him, didn't even look my way. His face was frozen, like he had a sour taste in his mouth. I didn't care what they thought. I stayed seated, my hands still folded in my lap. I didn't want to react. I couldn't. I was here for something else. I wasn't here to cause trouble. But Josh had made his point. He'd said what no one else had dared to say, and for the first time that day, I didn't feel quite so invisible. The room was quiet for a long moment before the clapping started, unsure at first, hesitant, but then it grew louder, more genuine. Real, not forced. I let it wash over me, trying to ignore the way my father shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his face twitching with irritation. But I didn't look away. I didn't need to. Josh had said what needed to be said, and that was enough. The applause faded, but I still felt the weight of it, the recognition. Josh had said what needed to be said, and for a second, it almost felt like I mattered. But then, just as quickly, the emptiness crept back in. I stepped out of the ballroom into the cool night air. It was quieter here, the low hum of conversation from inside muffled by the thick walls of the church. I leaned against the stone exterior, breathing deep, trying to shake off the strange mix of pride and frustration twisting in my chest. Then I heard voices, sharp, heated. I turned slightly, and there they were. Michael and the wedding planner, standing off to the side, unaware I was nearby. "I don't care what the hell Josh said," Michael was saying, his voice low but tight with anger. "She was never supposed to be here. This wedding was supposed to be about Kate and me, not about her showing up and causing a scene." The planner tried to calm him, her voice soft but pleading. "Michael, I understand, but—" "No," he snapped. "I told you I don't care what it looks like. She wasn't supposed to be on the list, and I'm not going to let her ruin everything." I felt the air in my lungs freeze, so that's how it was. Even after everything, after Josh's public words, they still couldn't let go of their need to control the narrative. Michael's words twisted tighter. "I don't know how she even got here. That woman, she's nothing but a distraction. Always has been." The planner hesitated. "But her name, I don't want to hear it," Michael cut in. "It was a mistake. We took care of it. She's not supposed to be here." I stood still, my mind racing. We took care of it. I almost laughed at how casually he said it, like I was some problem they could just sweep under the rug. And then I heard something else, something that made my blood run cold. The planner mentioned a guest list. The guest list. I couldn't help myself. I moved quietly, unnoticed, toward the table where the wedding materials were set up. The clipboard with the guest list sat there, unattended. I grabbed it without hesitation, flipping through the pages until I found the list of names. My name was there, near the end, scrawled in Josh's handwriting, unmistakable. But right beside it, there was a line, drawn through my name, bold and deliberate. "Michael's doing." I snapped a photo with my phone, steadying my hand. The image captured everything. Josh's careful, personal addition of my name, and then Michael's cold strike through it. My jaw tightened. I wasn't here for drama, but I wasn't going to be erased, not like this. I could feel the edges of my resolve hardening, that familiar sense of determination creeping in. They'd been trying to rewrite the story for years, but this time, I was going to make sure the truth was out there. I tucked the phone back in my pocket and walked back toward the ballroom, my steps calm, deliberate. I wasn't going to let this affect me. Not now. Not when I was so close to proving what I needed to prove. I returned to my seat without a word. Michael was nowhere to be seen, probably still fuming with whatever plans he'd cooked up. The reception moved on around me, but I didn't feel the need to join in. Not yet. I didn't need to make a scene. I just needed to keep my head down and wait for the next inevitable move, because I knew deep down that this wasn't over, not by a long shot. The reception carried on, the clinking of glasses and low murmurs filling the room like some distant hum I was barely a part of. I stayed in my seat, watching the usual toasts and speeches with a quiet detachment. People smiled, laughed, the kind of polite gestures you make when you're at a family event you're only half invested in. I felt invisible again. It wasn't a new feeling. It was just amplified here, in the middle of all these people who knew exactly what I was supposed to be to them, but couldn't care less that I wasn't. I could sense Michael's unease across the room. He was fidgeting, running his fingers along the rim of his glass, his jaw tense. Every time he glanced in my direction, it was like he was bracing himself for something. I didn't know if he was more worried about my presence being noticed or about the fact that I hadn't left yet. Either way, he was clearly uncomfortable. I let him squirm. Then Josh got up, holding a glass of champagne in his hand. I didn't know what I expected, but it wasn't this. There was a hush as he approached the mic, everyone's eyes on him. A small, self-aware smile tugged at his lips as he surveyed the room, and for a second, it felt like everything in that place quieted down, like they were waiting for something, waiting for him. He cleared his throat and raised his glass. "I'd like to propose a toast," he began, his voice steady but carrying. The usual, a pause. "But before I do that, there's someone here who I need to thank." I straightened up in my chair, the sudden shift in tone pulling me out of my haze. "Not just for today," Josh continued, "but for everything. For showing me what it means to be a leader, and more importantly, for being the kind of person who shows up when it matters most." The room held its breath. I looked at him steady. He wasn't looking at me now, but I knew he was speaking to me. He didn't say my name. He didn't need to. But he said something far more significant than that. He said rank. Not in those words exactly, but the meaning was clear. This wasn't a thank you from a colleague or a friend. This was a recognition of what had happened between us, between me and him, years ago, in a place where the only thing that mattered was getting each other out alive. "My mentor, my friend," Josh went on, his voice quiet but strong. "I want to thank someone who taught me more about leadership than any class ever could." There it was, a simple acknowledgement that carried everything. And as the words settled in the room, I watched my father's hand tighten around his glass. His knuckles turned white, his gaze fixed ahead, but I could see the fury simmering underneath. It wasn't just me Josh was talking about. It was the fact that my presence here had become unavoidable, despite how much they tried to erase me, despite how much they wanted to control the narrative. And Michael? He didn't even flinch. He looked like he was going to explode. His eyes were wide, almost frantic, darting back and forth between Josh and me. His mouth twisted like he was about to say something, probably something that would have made this moment even more unbearable. But he didn't. I didn't move. I didn't smile, didn't react. I wasn't here for a confrontation. I wasn't here for any more drama. But this was the moment where Josh took control. And in doing that, he handed me the kind of acknowledgement that couldn't be erased, no matter how hard they tried. The room started clapping, polite at first, hesitant. But as it went on, the sound grew more genuine. It wasn't just the obligatory applause people give when they're expected to. This was different, real. It was a moment of acknowledgement that felt like it was meant for me. And when the applause died down, I didn't feel invisible anymore. I felt something else. Like I had been seen, even if it was just for a fleeting moment. The night moved on, but that moment, that small shift, lingered in the air. And as I sat back, letting the noise of the reception swirl around me, I realized that this had been a bigger victory than I'd let myself believe. Because sometimes you don't need to be the loudest voice in the room to make sure the truth gets heard. After the toast, I needed to get away from the crowd. The noise, the forced cheerfulness, all of it was starting to feel suffocating. I stepped outside, the cool night air hitting my face like a welcome relief. The sky above was dark, only the faintest hint of stars peeking through the clouds, and for a moment, I let myself just stand there and breathe. I pulled out my phone, almost absent-mindedly, and flicked through the notifications. A couple of messages, nothing worth responding to. But then I saw an email from Josh's assistant. I opened it. The subject line was simple: "Thank you." The email was short, but it hit me harder than I expected. There was a photo attached: Josh, standing by the mic during his toast, a glimpse of me in the background, unnoticed by most. The caption read, "You showed up when no one expected you to. Thank you for being part of the day." I stared at the screen for a few long moments, trying to process the words. It wasn't about the acknowledgement. It wasn't even about Josh. It was about something deeper, something I hadn't realized I needed until now. I hadn't come here for recognition. I hadn't come to force my way into their lives or cause any more drama. I came to hold on to something: my integrity, my sense of self. The truth was, no one could ever truly erase me. Not as long as I could still show up. I put the phone down, the weight of the moment settling on me. The recognition, in its quiet form, was enough. Maybe that was all I needed. But there was still one last thing I had to do. I went back inside, not to join the festivities, but to do what I'd planned. I found a quiet corner, opened my email again, and attached the photo I'd taken of the guest list with my name crossed out. I wasn't about to let that moment pass without making sure Kate knew the truth. I wrote a short note, careful to keep it to the point. "Thought you should know who tried to silence your guest?" I hit send and leaned back in my chair, a sense of calm washing over me. There was no fanfare, no confrontation, just the truth. I wasn't trying to make a scene, just making sure the right people knew what had really happened. The kind of justice that didn't demand a show, just a quiet, undeniable fact. The weight of the day didn't feel so heavy anymore. The silence that used to trap me, the quiet erasure, had lost its power. Now it was just my story. I stood up feeling more at peace than I had in years, and walked back toward the ballroom. Whatever happened next, I was done playing their game. I wasn't here to make things right for anyone but me, and for once, that was enough. The next morning, my phone buzzed relentlessly, the screen lighting up with a dozen new messages. I hadn't even had a chance to breathe before the family group chat was exploding. I sat up in bed, scrolling through the messages with a quiet kind of resignation. There it was, as expected. Everyone had questions. Everyone had an opinion. Michael was the first to speak up naturally. His message was defensive, as always. "It wasn't about her," he wrote, the words clipped and terse. The whole thing was supposed to be about Kate and Josh, not whatever drama she decided to stir up. I could almost hear his voice in my head, sharp, accusing, like my presence was some kind of disruption he couldn't control. An aunt chimed in right after, her words dripping with confusion. "Why wasn't she on the list? Is there something I'm missing?" Then came Kate's message, a little softer but no less significant. "I'm sorry. It was a mistake, but I wanted her there." I paused. There it was. She hadn't wanted to shut me out. It had been someone else's decision. Before I could process that, Michael responded, his irritation obvious. "She doesn't belong in this world. I don't know why we even let her come." I felt the bite of his words. They didn't surprise me. They never did. But hearing it, seeing it in writing, made it sting more than it should have. Then, right as the tension was about to boil over, Josh's response came through. It was short, direct, and completely unflinching. "Actually," Josh wrote, "I invited her, and she's the reason I'm here today. I owe her everything." That was it. His message cut through all the noise like a knife through tension. There was no room for misunderstanding. Josh had made his choice. He wasn't going to let anyone rewrite the truth, especially not Michael. I could feel the shift in the atmosphere, even through a screen. Michael's response was silent for a moment, but I could almost hear him sputtering, trying to come up with something to say that would change the story, to control the narrative. But Josh had already spoken, and I had no doubt that his words would carry more weight than anything Michael could say. I stared at the messages for a while, not feeling any need to respond. What was there left to say? The truth was out there now. It wasn't about making anyone else see it. It was about me accepting it for myself. I wasn't the one who needed to explain. Josh had done that for me. I set the phone down, letting the quiet take over. No more arguments, no more games. The family was fractured, sure, but I wasn't the one holding the pieces together anymore. It was up to them to figure out how to put it back, not me. I exhaled slowly, finally feeling like I was done trying to fight a battle that wasn't mine to win. The following week, I walked into the hearing room with the kind of calm that only came from years of training. There was no room for nerves. This wasn't a battlefield, but it felt like one. The judge sat behind a large desk, the quiet hum of air conditioning the only sound in the room. A long table stretched between us, papers scattered across it like a reminder that nothing about this process would be easy. I could already feel the weight of everything on my shoulders. My father's name had been dragged through the mud before, but this was different. This wasn't about family politics. This was about something far more important, the truth. And for once, the truth was mine to tell. I took my seat, keeping my back straight, my hands folded neatly in front of me. The opposing side had already made their case. They tried to argue that the records were fine, that the discrepancies were nothing more than misunderstandings. But I knew better, and I wasn't about to let that lie stand. The judge glanced at me, his expression unreadable. I'd been through enough interrogations in my time to know that silence was as much a tool as speaking. I waited for him to speak first. "You may proceed," he said after a moment, his voice neutral. I stood, steady and deliberate, and walked to the front of the room. I'd rehearsed this in my head 100 times, but now that I was here, it felt different. It felt like everything had led up to this moment. I opened the file I'd brought with me, sliding the papers across the table for the judge's inspection. "I'm here to request an amendment to the military records of my late uncle, Captain Jonathan Hayes," I began, keeping my voice even. In the original records, his contributions during Operation Redline were erased. This was not an oversight. This was a deliberate action taken by my father to minimize my uncle's role. The judge leaned forward slightly, examining the documents. I continued. "My father has been decorated for his leadership in this operation, but there is evidence, concrete evidence, that my uncle, Captain Hayes, was not only a key player in the success of that mission, but he also risked his life to save his team, including my father." The room was still, the tension palpable. I could hear the quiet murmur of the opposing side as they shifted uncomfortably, but I didn't let that distract me. This wasn't about their discomfort, it was about the truth, plain and simple. "The manipulation of these records was not an accident," I said, my voice growing firmer. "It was a deliberate choice to rewrite history, to erase my uncle's sacrifice in favor of a more flattering narrative for my father. He did not act alone, and I have the proof to show it." I presented the evidence, the email chain, the testimonies from other officers who had been there, the photos from the field. Each one told the same story. My father had actively erased my uncle's contributions to protect his own image. The judge didn't speak, but I could see the wheels turning in his head. I knew the wheels of bureaucracy move slowly, but I wasn't about to back down. This wasn't just about my uncle's name. This was about holding someone accountable, even if that someone was my father. I stood there, waiting, letting the silence stretch out. The judge took his time, sifting through the evidence. His eyes flicked between the documents and me, his expression neutral, as if he were weighing every word, every piece of evidence. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the judge looked up. His voice was low but final. "The records will be amended to reflect Captain Jonathan Hayes' contributions to Operation Redline," he said. "The evidence presented is clear, and the discrepancies in the record will be corrected." It was done. The records would be changed. The truth, in its quiet way, had been heard. I didn't let myself smile. Not yet. This wasn't a victory I'd been fighting for in the open. It wasn't about public recognition. It was about making sure the people who deserved their due got it. My uncle would be remembered for what he'd done, and my father's carefully curated narrative would finally have a crack in it. As I gathered my things, I felt a sense of finality wash over me. This was the kind of justice I'd been seeking. Quiet, not grand, but steady and unyielding. It wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. Walking out of the room, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. It wasn't a perfect victory, but it was mine. And for once, it was enough. A few days later, I received the letter. It wasn't anything formal, just a plain envelope with no return address. I opened it slowly, already knowing what it was. "You made your point. We're done." That was it. No salutation, no signature. Just those words, blunt and final. I didn't feel anger, not like I thought I would. I wasn't even disappointed. I'd been expecting something like this for a while. It was the same thing he always did. Push you to the edge, then throw you out like you were never part of the picture in the first place. It wasn't even worth a response. Instead, I sat with the letter for a while, letting the weight of it sink in. It wasn't the end I'd been imagining. It wasn't a big, loud closing of doors. It was quieter than that. But in the silence, I felt something shift inside me. That silence, the one that had always held me back, the one that had been used against me, it was mine now. And I had learned how to use it as a weapon, a quiet, unyielding force that didn't need to scream to break barriers. I folded the letter and tucked it into my jacket pocket, walking out of the room without a second glance. The afternoon was gray, a light drizzle falling as I drove to the cemetery. It felt fitting. No fanfare, no grand gestures. Just the rain, the cold, and the weight of everything that had brought me here. I stood at my mother's grave, the same place I had visited for years, and I felt the familiar ache in my chest. My mother, the one who had never gotten the recognition she deserved, the one who'd always quietly stood in the background, giving and giving, never asking for anything in return. She had been erased too, in her own way, by the family's needs, by the lies they told, by the ones who got to decide what mattered and what didn't. I stood there for a while, letting the rain soak through my coat, until I felt steady enough to move. I took the rank insignia from my pocket, the one I'd earned on my own terms, the one that had been mine long before I'd ever stepped into that family's story. I pinned it over my heart. It wasn't an act of defiance. It wasn't meant to prove anything to anyone else. It was just a marker of what I'd earned, what I'd built, what I would never let anyone take from me again. As I stood there, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. Not the kind that comes from an apology or a dramatic reconciliation, but the kind that comes from rewriting your own story, from standing firm in the face of everything that tried to erase you. This was my life, and I was done letting them dictate how it should be remembered. I stood at my mother's grave for a few more moments, honoring her in my own quiet way, and then I turned and walked away. This was the last time I would ever feel like I didn't belong. The silence had broken me once, but now I was using it to break free.